Recording in progress.
So we had a client, and this client was, she was dating a lawyer, right? And this lawyer, he was a very successful man, very charismatic, somebody who, really knew how to command a room. And when she started working with us, she wasn't really sure about what was going on with him, because on one hand, she was attracted to him, she liked him, right? But on the other hand, there were things that kept coming up that were unsettling to her. And so as we dug into it, we began to realize that this guy she was dating was emotionally toxic, right? He was controlling, he was jealous. In fact, after we extricated her from that relationship, or at least we helped her extricate herself from that relationship, she ran into him in a bar, and he just unprompted threw a drink in her face. It was sort of a confirmation of his behavior, right?
Yeah.
What was wrong with him?
His behavior through the breakup and after really highlighted how off she was, because she kept blaming herself. She was in this position of, well, I'm in this relationship, and he had all these triggers and issues, and she kept finding that she was twisting herself into a pretzel trying to make this other person happy, but he could never be fulfilled. And it started off super romantic with these big romantic gestures and all of this stuff. And so it was this big high. And then suddenly it was like she could do no wrong in the very beginning. And then very shortly after a few months, then she could do nothing right. And so she was very perplexed about it when she became our client. And this is where she was still in the relationship, where she's like, I can't do anything right. And when we helped her get out of the relationship and see that his behavior was in fact toxic, as in emotionally abusive, she was so grateful that we helped get her out of it. And one of my favorite stories in the follow-up, because they lived still in the same town, she was at the market. She had a full shopping cart, and she ended up seeing him. He didn't see her. She grabbed her handbag, left the shopping cart full of groceries, walked out to the parking lot and drove away and went to a different supermarket, because you can't engage with somebody when there's toxic or abusive behavior. So for tonight's love intervention, we're going to give you our definitions of, for us, so we're all speaking the same language, because emotional abuse is, of course, abuse. We're going to call that toxic behavior.
Right.
And we're going to leave abuse for physical abuse. So as a survivor of domestic violence myself, we just want to sort of draw that line. Neither makes it acceptable for that person's behavior, but we want to draw we have our definitions. If you have any questions about that, feel free to pop it into the chat. But I just wanted to say that tonight we're going to focus on what is the difference between somebody who's toxic and has toxic behavior and also abusive behavior versus just regular, everyday, typical conflict. Oh my gosh, are you afraid of the C word? The conflict, we said the word.
We said the word.
Because in our, in society, many people have this false belief that we're going to meet this magical, mythical person, this right person for us, and suddenly it'll be like a fairy tale.
Yeah.
We lived happily ever after.
No conflict. He'll be able to read your mind and understand your needs exactly, and your needs will be met, and you won't ever have to speak up and have an uncomfortable conversation about.
Or you won't have any miscommunication.
No, certainly won't, because you'll be on the same page. You'll be simpatico, right?
Yeah. And so what we want to say is, absolutely, in the beginning of a relationship with so yummy and hot, and that romance phase is so intoxicating, but eventually those chemicals wear off and you end up in a relationship with a person who is not the same as you. They don't have the same past experiences. They don't have the same mental emotional patterns. They don't have the same triggers. You're two different people. And eventually you will end up in, the second stage of relationship, which is the power struggle stage. And no couple skips the power struggle. Oh my gosh, we're giving all the bad news right up front.
Right.
Hi, everybody. I'm Orna Walters.
And I'm Matthew Walters, and this is Love Intervention. We are here to intervene in your love life to get you off the path of frustration and heartbreak and get you on the path to long-lasting, soul-satisfying love. And today, like Orna said, we're really focusing on what's the difference between toxic behavior or abusive behavior versus normal conflict that happens in a relationship. So I want to talk about normal conflict first.
Great.
Because normal conflict sounds like conflict. What happens is you or your partner or both of you get upset, your voices raise, you can say things that are unkind, you can try to control your partner, you can do all kinds of behaviors to try to make yourself feel safe again. Because this is part of being human. Part of being human is that we get triggered. And when we get triggered, we behave in ways that our subconscious says, this is how I know to survive in the world. This is what I need in order to feel safe. And so I'm going to fight for what I need to feel safe, right? And oftentimes that means fighting against this person here that you love so much. So I'm not saying all this to exaggerate or to say that all relationships have to have big, loud conflicts, but just to understand that this is normal. Now, what makes it normal versus abusive behavior, versus toxic behavior, is at some point you calm yourself down. And at some point you come together with your partner and you say, wow, I'm so sorry. I said a lot of things I didn't mean. I communicated badly. I said some hurtful things, and I really don't think those things are true, and I'd like to take it all back, or some version of that, right? Some version of like...
This is my favorite, actually. Will you take it back? I love that. And then I always ask him to do it again, right? Because he will. Watch.
Right, because we make this little rewind sound, like we're rewinding and acting like the thing we just did that we're not proud of didn't happen, because we wish it hadn't.
Yeah. And, I mean, look, you can't control another person, ever. Any control freaks here today? Anybody? I mean, look, you never have control over another person. So there's a couple of reasons why we wanted to have the C word, conflict, right? The word conflict brings up a lot of stuff for people, because there are those people where there aren't those fights. You know, I had my first boyfriend when I was 14 years old. And I was very close with his family. I still call his mom to this day, and I'm now 57 years old. So I've called her mom for most of my life. Right. And the thing about his parents' relationship is they never fought. That's why I love spending time over there. There was never any outward arguing, but that couple divorced.
Right.
And I remember when I was in college, and Michael, my first boyfriend, who I stayed friends with, for many, many decades, these are people that came to our wedding, right? They're like family to me. And I remember being in college, and Michael called to tell me his parents were getting a divorce, and he said, I want to see you and catch up or whatever. And we sat down, and I could tell by his face like he had something really important to tell me, and he told me his parents were divorcing, and it's like I was one of their kids finding out about it almost. I mean, I was like devastated. And what I realized is all of this stuff, have you heard this phrase, water under the bridge, right? There was all this stuff they weren't communicating about. So you either have what Matthew described at the beginning, sort of this loud misunderstanding, conflict, fighting stuff, and you work it out, or you have the couple that's kind of in a Cold War, and they never really repair. And when you never really repair what's gone wrong, that's like a ticking time bomb. It's like this landmine all over your home where somebody can stumble in it and poof, the whole thing could go kablooey, which it did for this couple that I'm describing, the parents of my first boyfriend.
You remind me of years ago, we had lunch with another relationship expert. And
we're not going to say who.
We're not going to say who because it's not fair. But she said very early in the conversation that her and her husband never fight. They never fight. And we're like, okay, great. And Orna and I in the back of our mind, okay, sort of following that away. Because we openly talk about the fact that, we're both very passionate people, and 95% of the time our passions are in alignment, and 5% of the time they're not. And when they're not, we express that. We bump heads. We have misunderstandings,
thumb wrestle,
right?
But loud.
We thumb wrestle, but we clean it up. We fix it, and we repair. And what was interesting was we got to the end of the lunch, and she said, "Well, I know I said we never fight, but the truth is there are just some things that we agree to never talk about."
that made me.
That's a strategy, right? That's a strategy somebody can have in a relationship. Yeah. However, like Orna said, it is a landmine. It's this ticking time bomb that at some point it's going to come up because you can't ignore those differences forever. I mean, we have differences. We have very strong differences about a lot of things. And we talk through them. We work through them.
Not that many.
Well, okay, I'm exaggerating a little bit. But we communicate about them. And we agree about our differences. We agree they're differences.
Yeah.
Right? And we let them be differences. But we still talk about them. And sometimes they come up and we have to work through them again. Say, all right, these are our differences.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
I mean, I think even in the last love intervention, like you said something I didn't agree with, and I was like, I don't agree with that. And we had this little it was kind of like a tussle. We got some emails about it. People were like, we loved watching you guys work that out together because we know we're in this relationship. So I'm not worried. You know, we have all of these sayings that we like to sort of bust these myths of these ridiculous colloquialisms about being in a relationship. And one of the ones I hate the most is pick your battles. God, that one annoys me so much because I don't have to pick my battles. I'm not at war with my husband. So if I am upset or disappointed or frustrated about something at a 0.1%, I can talk to him about that, right? Just like if I didn't realize, like, things added up, and suddenly I was like, why, and it doesn't go well. We can clean that up too.
Yeah.
So there isn't anything we don't talk about. Our agreement is we can talk about anything. Our other part of the agreement, ladies, is we don't have to talk about everything. Men are, I always say, use your man in the best way that you can. He can be supportive of you. But if I want to give the play-by-play about me and this other girlfriend, I'm going to call another girlfriend. Because he's not going to want to hear, and then she said, and then I said, and then she said, and then I said, and, the tennis match details. Like,
the eyes are going to glaze over, right?
Exactly.
It's like, I don't even know
Yeah,
what to do with all that. Because my inclination is to want to jump in and fix and help, and that never goes well.
Because I don't need help.
Because she doesn't need help.
Yeah.
She just needs to talk. And it's okay. So
we digress.
We digress. So before we go further, I want to do this. I want everybody who's here to introduce themselves real quick in the chat.
Yeah.
To say hi. Let us know where you're from.
And if you feel like where are you physically right now?
Yeah,
not where you're from. Maybe
sure.
you're traveling somewhere. So
sure.
Where are you right now in the world? Because we want to send our little heart, all love in our heart out to everybody that's joining us tonight. Why don't you say hi in the chat? If you're on Facebook, you can put in the comments. Same on YouTube. And our team will port things over here.
And I also want you, if you're willing, I want you to say whether you're generally an avoidant or whether you're, I'm going to say, a passionate, right?
But that's not you can't use part attachment theory and part whatever you're
I wasn't using
up.
Attachment theory. I just said whether you avoidant, meaning you avoid conflict.
Or you're passionate about conflict?
Or you're passionate about conflict.
Nobody's passionate about conflict. You can't do that.
That
doesn't work for me.
All right, what do you want it to be then?
You can't use avoidant, which is a language.
Well, then what do you want it to be?
It's like, okay, first off, a bunch of people are saying hi.
Yes.
So you read through those. Hi, everybody. We don't need to read them all out loud. I'm gonna come up with some labels.
See, Natalie is passionate there in New York City.
Are you passionate about conflict? Because, look, I remember once we were having a conflict about, I'm sure, not work, because people think because we work together we fight about work stuff. Almost never. It's usually about food and has to do with the kitchen and when we eat and what we eat and why. I don't know why, but whatever. Anyway, and it was something, and I remember Matthew looking at me and saying, I know you have to fight about this, and I just burst out laughing because I thought that was the funniest thing I'd ever heard. Because my response was, no, I'm willing to fight about it. I'm willing to fight about it now and clean it up so that I don't have to think about it anymore. Because the thing about knowing how to repair, which is what the toxic/abusive person is incapable of doing. And that's what we want you to know. Tonight we promised to share like a little mini masterclass so you can find out who to stick with and who to move on from. Because the truth is we always come back to repair.
So I want to share a couple things because people piped in. We have Tina from Canoga Park.
Oh,
we
you're right up the road. Right up the
Alexia
405. Hi
from
there.
Kissimmee, Florida. And Alexia
Hello.
says, when I get married, you guys will be invited to my wedding.
Yay!
I love you guys.
We'd
We
love to come.
love weddings, so
And
we'll come.
we're officiants too. So
Yep.
if you're looking for an officiant, we either one or both of us can be the officiant.
There you go.
And we'd love to be at your wedding. You're so sweet.
We have Princess Aquarius, who's in Mississauga, Ontario. I'm sure I said that incorrectly.
Yes, you
And
did.
Margaret from New York says avoidance. She avoids conflict.
Yep.
Marilyn from Bright, Indiana says conflict is hard, but I'd rather deal with it than run or hide. I love that
Yay.
answer.
I love that you know
And
that
then we
about
have
yourself.
Vicky from Portland. So
Hi, Vicky.
really great. I mean, this awareness, this sense of how you are with conflict and what you're willing to do. Like Orna said, she's willing to fight about things that are important.
So that we can clean it up and move on. I memean, look, we could have had a conflict yesterday and I wouldn't remember what it was about. Because when I'm ready to accept an apology from Matthew and I accept that apology, I'm done with it now. So I'm not cataloging it. I'm not going to be like, well, this is the third time we had to have the thing about the thing and the thing. Because we don't keep score over here. We're not playing a game of like tennis or whatever. We're just not there's no score keeping. So when you're keeping score, there's some kind of gotcha thing or whatever, and we just don't play by those rules. But the person who is toxic, the person who is abusive, the person that is gaslighting you, the person who's making you feel like you've lost your mind is never willing to accept responsibility.
Before we go into that.
No, not before. You keep saying before. I want to share this.
Okay,
You've said a lot.
Go for it. Go ahead.
Not before. I started talking about it now, and we're going to keep
Yes,
talking about
and
it.
I just wanted to throw in a
Because
piece. but
I want
got
to
it.
say what's really important here is for us to be clear that saying before when you've already started is a little manipulative.
No, it's not manipulative. I just
Or a little controlling.
No, it's not controlling either. There's just
Okay.
a piece I want to throw out there about normal triggered behavior that oftentimes people interpret as toxic.
Okay, but we'll get there. We have to lay out the ground rules of what the toxic and abusive
you got
person
it.
isn't capable of.
We can
first.
do it in your order.
Thank you. Yay, I won that one. Just kidding. I'm not keeping score. Okay, look, I'm purposefully using some language that can be triggering and saying you're being this, you're being that, and I never speak that way with you because that's not how we communicate with each other. And I wanted to model it for you how it doesn't feel good. Who didn't feel good when I started saying to Matthew, that's manipulative or that's controlling? Who didn't like that?
Anyone?
I didn't like it. It was so weird to do that, actually.
I didn't particularly like it either.
I know. It's because we don't speak that way. We wanted to model it for you the way most people do that stuff. So if something was going on that I really didn't like, I don't know, say something I don't like.
On the
I
spot?
don't know how to do it again.
I feel forced on the spot. I don't know. So before we talk about that, why don't we talk about something else?
Great.
See, there you go.
You're adorable. Mwah. Look, I just want to finish up this piece about what the person that's truly toxic and truly not able to meet you, because there's this thing that we do when we care about somebody that we invest quickly. And the problem with that is it doesn't let us have the conflicts to work it out. So back in 1998, I ended up moving to Hawaii. I had a boyfriend long distance. I was in Los Angeles. He was in Hawaii. And I still remember the conversation the night before I was moving to Hawaii and moving in with him. And it went something like this. Are you nervous? He asks me. And I said, oh yeah. And he said, what are you nervous about? And I said, well, we haven't had a conflict. We haven't had an argument or disagreement. And he's like, oh, I know. And that's why I think it's so great, because we don't disagree. We get along so well and all this. And I was like, yeah, I don't know. I was just like, But there's something you discover when there's conflict about how that relationship is going to go. And since we hadn't had any, I was a little like, well, here we go. Here I go to Hawaii, because I'd made that commitment and I'd, made all those moves. And he'd been campaigning me for months, like move here, move here, move here, move here. And I kept thinking, it's Hawaii, for goodness sakes, my dream place I wanted to live my whole life. So I packed up, I moved to Hawaii. We didn't make it. When the conflict did happen, he completely shut down, couldn't talk about it. Now, I'm not saying he's toxic, and he certainly wasn't abusive, but he wasn't able to communicate through the conflict. He was super avoidant, as in we just don't talk about it. And that didn't work for me, because I am somebody that needs to at least come together and have what we call the repair.
Mm-hmm.
And the repair for us is the cleaning things up, where I own my stuff. Like, I'm sorry, Matthew, that I called you manipulative or controlling behavior, because I know that's not the way you're not triggered. I mean, sometimes you could be that way if you're triggered. I could be that way if I'm triggered. That's normal. Mm-hmm. So every person gets triggered, and because you have no control over another person, we want to shift this conversation. And remember, we're going to take your questions too, so be thinking about your questions. But what I want to share with you is the repair process is an apology practice. It's where an amends is offered if necessary. Mm-hmm. And the most important thing is where you take responsibility for where you behaved badly. And an abusive person, a toxic person, is never able to do that. So the difference between who you stick it out with and who you stay with and who you move on from is, are they able to say, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, I screwed up, I'm sorry. Sometimes, it's, I'm sorry I lost my shit. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry I lost my shit. But if you're the kind of person that's like, no, I didn't, and you don't want to take responsibility for your own stuff, that's the person we want to talk with a little bit more, because the fear that, oh my gosh, if you admit you've screwed things up, that if you're that person right now listening to us, what is the fear? Because you haven't really decided to love all of those parts of you yet, that you're hiding this thing and you don't want to take responsibility for.
Yeah.
Is there something you want to say about that?
Well, I mean, it's no secret. I think I've said this before. I'm 21 years sober, coming up in September.
Yeah.
21 years sober, and part of addiction is not taking responsibility. Part of addiction is not taking responsibility for your behavior, because addiction is a way of avoiding responsibility. And so, not saying that everybody who avoids responsibility is an addict, but just say that I have a deep understanding of this fear of taking responsibility, because it says when you take responsibility, it says that you're owning the part of you that's broken, and it's like it's confirming that you're broken. And by saying, wow, I actually did behave badly, part of what it feels like inside, you're saying I'm a bad person. And it's not true. Actually, if you're saying I behaved badly and I'm taking responsibility for that, that actually makes you a good person.
Yeah.
We always say that integrity is not about how, it's partially about how you behave in your life on a day-to-day basis, but integrity really is about how you behave when you make a mistake, when you screw up. Because integrity is about coming back into rapport, back into integrity with yourself and owning your stuff. So most people, though, who we talk to, who are part of this community, we find are the opposite. They're the ones that are taking too much responsibility. And when you take too much responsibility, that actually leaves you in a place to be open to those toxic and manipulative people. Because the toxic and manipulative person is always making you feel like you're the one that did something wrong.
Yep.
And so you are constantly feeling like, oh, well, maybe I did do something wrong because this person's really upset. And they keep saying that they're upset because I did something wrong. So I think if I say I'm sorry, that maybe they won't be upset anymore. Right? If you combine that taking too much responsibility with that fear of conflict, then you've got a real recipe there for setting yourself up for being open to toxic people.
Yep.
Being open to people who want to manipulate you or want to control you, want you to constantly feel like you're in the wrong and therefore they're in the right.
And I want to say that one of the reasons we wanted to do this call tonight is because the reason why we picked this topic for love intervention is because most of our clients are taking too much responsibility. Mm-hmm. And therefore we've heard tons of, we've had so many different clients come to us with their past being filled with these toxic and abusive relationships. So the thing you want to do is you want to imagine, I know somebody here is in Canoga Park, which is up the road from the 405 freeway from us. If you've ever seen any of the traffic jams here on the news or something in LA, In Los Angeles, there could be 4 lanes of highway each direction. And in the middle is a cement barrier down the middle. So you can imagine the 405 freeway, that cement barrier down the middle. And you're on one side of the road looking across the highway. Mm-hmm. What you are to take responsibility for is everything on your side of the highway, your side of the street. And what you don't have to take responsibility for is everything on the other side of the highway. Everything on the other side of that cement barrier belongs to that other person. So you are not responsible for how they respond to you. The biggest mistake we make in our communication is we judge the success of our communication based on the response we get from the other person. Mm-hmm. And I think that's so important. I'm going to say it again, because sometimes people go, wait, huh? And so if you're taking notes, I'm going to say it again. And of course you can catch the replay, but I'm going to say it again. The biggest mistake we make in our communication is we judge the success of our communication based on the response we get from the other person. And it's literally like taking your power and throwing it in the toilet and flushing it down the toilet. Mm-hmm. Because you are not responsible for the other person's triggers. They are. So how do you judge the success of your communication? I heard you all ask. What do I judge? Orna, how do I judge the success of my communication? And we're going to say by one measure and one measure only. By how authentic you're able to be. You're going to judge the success of your own communication. It's a self-assessment. Mm-hmm. How authentic were you able to be? I mean, we know people that don't express anger, and they hold on to it, and they're like, no, I'm not upset. And they pipe everything down. They minimize their own feeling state, even though there's rage inside. Right? And of course there are those people that, it's like, oh my God, everything, they never break a nail. It's always like they broke their leg. You know what I mean? So there are those, but most of our clients are working from that other place of taking too much responsibility. And I used to be that person. And that's why I'm so passionate about sharing this with you tonight, because I used to be that person. And in our sort of dynamic, we have a way of looking at, is somebody oriented as a you first or as a me first? Mm-hmm. That's a great example. I don't know another way I don't want to get into how we do it or anything like that, but I'm oriented very much as a you first, which means I think of my partner's needs before my own. And Matthew is very much oriented as a me first, meaning he automatically is like what they tell you on the airplane, when you get on and they say masks can fall from the ceiling, and if cabin pressure drops, and if you're with someone who needs assistance, you all know what I'm going to say next, right? Put your own mask on first before you help the other person. You can't help someone breathe
if you can't breathe, right?
You can't breathe.
I can't be of service if I'm drained, if I need to refuel myself. Yeah. And
so the me first aren't selfish and the you first aren't saintly. It's just the me first automatically take care of themselves first, so then they have the fuel to take care of their partner too. And the you first are running on empty trying to take care of their partner's needs first. Yeah. And so that's the dynamic. Most you first end up with a me first in intimate relationship. We always hear that saying that opposites attract, and it's very true when it comes to this you first, me first dynamic. So we are going to be taking your questions. I know there's a few more things you want to say. Don't worry. Suzanne says, great analogy. Thank you. I also just want to say, look, we want to answer your questions. So I don't want to be talking until 10 minutes in, 10 minutes left in this, in our hour together tonight. We want to hear, what is this stirring up in you? And I also want to come back to the labels, because you said avoidant or passionate. I was like, who's passionate about conflict?
Yeah, we'll get there, but I want to talk, because you talked about authenticity, and I want to talk about what we mean by authenticity.
Sure.
And I'm going to say the thing, and then I'm going to talk about it and expand. So what we mean by authenticity is that you can identify how you feel, and you can express it using an I statement. I feel blank. Right, that's authenticity. Is being able to communicate your feeling state. Now, it's important that it is an I statement and that it stays an I statement, and it's not an I statement with a lot of yous thrown into it. Because oftentimes people think they're being authentic when they say, well, you did this and you did that, and that's triggering to me. And right, they think that's being authentic, but that's not actually being authentic. That's just sharing your opinion about the experience of what happened. It's sharing your story,
Your perspective.
about the events. And your perspective about the events aren't going to help you repair and actually even trying to determine who was right and who was wrong and getting agreement on who was right and who was wrong. That also is not going to help your argument in any way, shape, or form. Because if I'm sitting here fighting that what I did was right and what Orna did was wrong, what I'm saying is this person I love is wrong, right? And that feels like crap.
Nobody wants to be wrong.
Nobody wants to be
in that
wrong,
equation.
and nobody wants to be going around telling their partner that they're wrong all the time. So it is about owning it. It's about taking responsibility and saying, I felt this when this happened, and this is my trigger. Now, here's an interesting thing, because this has come up lately. I've been seeing this in like social media stuff, this conversations about people using therapeutic language as a way of controlling. And the example I heard was, I'm triggered by your actions, so I need you to stop doing them. Right? That's totally controlling. It's totally controlling. It has nothing to do with setting a boundary or owning your triggers, because owning your trigger says, wow, I was really triggered and I behaved badly, and I really should have calmed myself down instead of letting my triggers rule my behaviors. Right? That's owning your triggers. Not saying, well, this is triggering to me, so stop doing it.
I'm like, oh right? My gosh, it's so awful to hear that somebody thinks they're setting a boundary by telling somebody to let go of a behavior. You know, we often talk about people making requests. Mm-hmm. We'll say, look, through the dating process, make requests, see how the other person responds. And it's true that, you know, through the dating process, you get to have that evaluation without a lot at stake, right? So that's why we always say slow love is really the antidote to having your heart broken or having these short-term relationships. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of counterintuitive because it feels so good in the beginning. People want to jump in with the feeling. And what we want to say is, it is counterintuitive. The slower you go towards that commitment and physical intimacy, aka sex, that's right, I'm talking about sex, people. Don't rush to the sex. So don't rush to exclusivity, don't rush to the sex. Because then it's like you're wearing goggles. You're wearing like, I've had sex with you goggles, and you don't see that person as who they really are anymore. Especially for women. It's like we chemically bond when we have sex with a man. Most women do, right? And so I want you to understand that when you're physically intimate with somebody, everything changes. Even if your mind says, well, I'm just doing it because I want to. And look, I'm not asking you to be a prude. I was never a prude. So please, have all the sex you want when you're not looking for a relationship. I don't care. I have no judgment at all. But if you're looking for a long-lasting love relationship, delay the physical intimacy. Because you want to evaluate how that person is showing up for you. Mm-hmm. Are they showing up for you, or are they showing off? That's a big distinction to make, right? A lot of men particularly are taught to show off. You know, it's on all the animal species. We've talked about it a lot here on Love Intervention, about the birds prancing around and showing off their stuff. And male humans will do that too. So it doesn't matter if you're, you know, whatever your sexual orientation or whatever your gender identity or any of this, we are painting with large brushstrokes when we're talking about male, female in this particular instance. But I promise you, if we had a conversation just with you, and you're somewhere in the middle in this gender fluid stuff that's happening, it works too in the same way. You just have to know your own orientation to understand who's a good match for you, because you want to evaluate that over time. You don't want to end up like me in 1998. Quitting your job and subletting your apartment and shipping all your stuff to Hawaii, and then shortly after your stuff arrives in Hawaii, getting it shipped back because you're come back to LA because it didn't work out because you couldn't make it through a conflict. And that's basically what happened to me, right? So I want you to understand that taking too much responsibility is not the answer. Pretending that there isn't a conflict, wanting to brush it under the rug, creates a landmine. And instead, you want to have your own emotional mastery. So emotional mastery doesn't mean you don't lose your shit. Mm-hmm. It means you take responsibility when you lose your shit. So Matthew's talking about integrity. Integrity doesn't mean you do everything perfectly. Integrity shows up the most when you make a mistake. So I like to say it's like we all fall down. But when you fall down, are you able to then pick yourself back up and take responsibility? because we all have our triggers. And when you take responsibility to say, oh, these are mine. Like, I grew up in a home of chaos. So I have this little subconscious story about chaos. It's not true that there's no chaos in my home now with Matthew. But when I'm triggered, I'm responding from that little Orna who's like, oh my God, it's chaos. Anything can happen. Right?
Yeah.
And so I'll say, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I was triggered. I was triggered in my story of chaos. And I need some help so that I can feel free from chaos. And that's what I say. I want to know what their questions are. So we've been talking for a long time. We're going to introduce ourselves.
Yes, go for it.
Some people may have come late.
Yeah.
Hey, we've been talking a lot. My name's Orna Walters.
And I'm Matthew Walters, and this is Love Intervention.
And we're here to intervene in your love life so we can end your patterns of heartbreak and disappointment and get you on the path to soul-satisfying, long-lasting love. When you take time through the dating process, I don't think people understand that when we say delay the intimacy, that we're not being party poopers. We're saying, that it's so great when you get to share your life with somebody long term, because the love gets so much depth and breadth and flavors and layers, and it's so yummy between us now. And certainly that romance phase, when we look back on 2007, we're like, oh, it's great memories. But it feels a little shallow. And we want you to experience what it's like to love somebody over a lifetime together, where you're like, yeah, the other night I went to bed and I was like, I'm shaking fists in protest. I didn't like that. Whatever. And then we look at each other and say, I love you anyway.
Yeah.
And when you're with somebody over time, you can give them the benefit of the doubt, but you don't want to give the stranger the benefit of the doubt.
All right, Suzanne has a couple really great questions. The first part of her question is, what about red flags when you really don't know someone yet? I guess it's best to talk about it. So red flags, let's talk about red flags early on in a relationship.
Yes.
Red flag number one, somebody is trying to control you in any way. They're trying to get you to behave a certain way, do a certain thing in a certain way, and it is all in some way designed to make them feel happy or more attracted to you or whatever.
Or somebody admonishing what you share about yourself. Or if they use information about that you've shared with them, like details about, and they use it against you, particularly in an argument.
Yeah.
So like you
That's
had a client.
Total red flag.
Yeah, that's a big red flag. So you had that example with your client before we started working together.
Oh yeah, this was such a mess. So I had a client who was in a very toxic relationship with this guy who was an artist, and he was very successful.
She was sober.
Right, she was sober. He was not. He would do things like leave open bottles of alcohol at her house. And he would also take the information she had shared about her childhood and her difficulties in her childhood and throw it in her face whenever there was an argument. So those are really obvious red flags. But I want to talk about smaller ones. So
subtle ones.
Subtle red flag. Yeah. Another subtle red flag is an inability to take responsibility for your behavior. So if you find somebody, say they're talking about their past relationships, and the problem is always with the other person. It's with their exes, it's with their old friends, it's with their boss, right? If the problem is always outside of them, that's a red flag that you're dealing with somebody who can't take responsibility.
And I think most of you are from our community, from our Love on Purpose community, you probably know, and I said at the beginning, I am a survivor of domestic violence, and I will tell you, in that relationship, that boyfriend of mine always had all of these stories, and women did horrible things to him. Like, I remember this one story where he said this woman he had a vintage vehicle that he loved, and this ex-girlfriend, put sugar in his gas tank, which I guess ruins the car, like, forever.
It ruins the motor, yeah.
Yeah. And I remember at the time, I was like, oh, what did you do to her? And he got really weird about that question. So it doesn't mean that they couldn't have had somebody treat them badly, but when you ask the question, what did you do to them, there should be an answer. And he was like, he didn't want to take any responsibility for what he may have done to that woman. I have an idea after the event in which he tried to kill me. I was like, oh, I bet I have a feeling I know what you did. And I'm not saying that justifies somebody ruining his car. I'm just saying, beware. So the red flag is where somebody keeps telling you about that, repetitive stories of different people behaving terribly in relationship with them. there's probably two sides to that dance. I mean, we tango together in a relationship. And so if they're always saying, well, this person did this to me and this person did this, but they're never owning what's on their side of the street, like we talked about, right? The other big red flag for me is honestly somebody who just can't apologize. There are people who will just literally never say the words, I'm sorry. And if they do, they use it not as a real apology. Like, have you ever gotten one of these? I'm sorry if you blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. I'm sorry you were upset.
I'm sorry if you see it that way.
These are not apologies.
Yeah.
They're not.
That's
They're really not.
An apology is when you're sorry for something you did, because you're like, I'm sorry I lost my shit. I'm sorry I misbehaved. I'm sorry that I didn't communicate very well. I'm sorry I communicated badly. I'm sorry I raised my voice. I'm sorry I was late.
I'm sorry I forgot. Right?
Yeah.
Those are all.
Oh my gosh, I made a mistake. I mean, I remember. Oh, I'm going to tell this one really quick.
Okay.
I know there's got to be more than just Susanna with questions.
I have more red flags to talk about too.
I know. So I'm just going to say this little story really quick. So several years back, we had a custom sectional sofa made for our home.
Telling the sofa story.
And that sofa got delivered, and it was perfect, and we love it. We still have it actually. And I don't know, we had that maybe a week, if that. Do you remember how long? You just can't talk. 3 days.
Yeah, I don't know.
And I was out, and I came home, and I walked through the front door, and Matthew blurts out, I stayed in the couch. And I lost my shit. I was like, what? That wasn't pretty. It sounded something like that. And when we did a repair, and we remembered we bought the extra protection stuff and had the people come out and clean it, and if they couldn't clean it, they would have fixed it or made a new cushion or whatever, new sofa, all that. We bought the extra protection, people. So there wasn't really anything to worry about too much. And one of the things in the repair, I looked at my awesome husband and I said, babe, I would have heard you so differently if I would have come through the door and you said, honey, can you sit down for a second? I have something to share with you and I'm a little nervous to say it. I would have been listening with different ears, because my response was, I'm coming home to my new couch and my awesome husband, couch is stained, what? Like, it felt like being sideswiped. Like I'm driving down the road of a happy day and suddenly out of nowhere somebody sideswipes and T-bones my car. Like that's how I felt. It came out of the blue. And so, of course, I was upset. But if he would have given me a little bit of a preamble and set the stage, like, I'm kind of nervous to say this, I would have a different tuning device in my ears to hear what could he possibly be nervous to tell me.
Yeah, this is great, when you're taking responsibility for your behavior, to ease into it. And I just want to say, however I said it wasn't a responsibility for the upset that Orna had. Orna owns her upset, right? I own my communication.
Yes.
Those two things are very important, a distinguishing thing to say.
Yeah.
Now, another red flag that can show up early on in a relationship is if somebody either diminishes your emotions or argues with your emotions or in some way says your emotions are wrong or unnecessary or something like that. If somebody can't sit and allow you to have your emotional experience, that's the red flag as well, right? So I think those are a few things to look out for. Susan has another question. It's not really a question, but I'm going to take it as one. She says, I find many don't have the patience for taking things slowly. And
I wonder, because you don't say many, so that you're not saying I don't have the patience. So it's kind of it's an interesting way to phrase that comment here in our chat box.
Many people, many men, many people.
I don't know.
You're meeting
and are
online.
You including yourself? Oh no, my mic
good.
is being weird. That I'm wondering if you're including yourself in that group, because I know I was terrible at it. I was terrible at taking things slowly. I was like, take me, claim me, love me. I want to be in a rut with you. Like as soon as I had all the feelings, like I love being in a rut with somebody. I really do. I liked being in a relationship with somebody. And it wasn't so much that I didn't like being alone. I really didn't go from one relationship to the next. I spent plenty of time on my own. But I really liked knowing the stability of that I was in a relationship with somebody. It felt there was something stable about the fact, like, oh, now this person's my boyfriend and I'm their girlfriend, and I liked that. And now I'm a wife, right? And I have a husband, which it took me. I didn't know I'd have a husband for so long that sometimes it's weird. It comes out of my mouth. I'm like, I have a husband. Oh, and I'm a wife. Wow. Right? Because I didn't know if that was going to happen for me for so long. And so I would love to open this conversation up so that you guys start asking us our questions.
We actually have more questions.
I know, about the C word.
Oh.
Because this whole idea around, is it toxic or abusive behavior? Neither one of those are okay. If somebody is emotionally abusive or physically abusive, and we're labeling, if you're a little late, we did this up front, we're labeling toxic behavior as abusive. But in all of this, in the bigger conversation, what we want to say is you have zero control over another person. The only person you have control over is you. So who out there is looking for some insights into how to deal with your own triggers? Dave?
Yes. So we have a program coming up. Basically, it's your opportunity to say, this is the thing I want to work on, and that's what we're going to work on with you. And if somebody else says, well, I have this other thing I want to work on, that's what we're going to work on with them. This is your opportunity to get specific, laser-focused coaching just on you and the issue you want to focus on in your relationships right now. We call it Love on Purpose Mentoring. If you want to check it out, you can go to loveonpurposementoring.com. We just put the
link is in the
link
chat.
there in the chat.
The thing that's great about this is it's a small group, and in a small group, a theme always emerges. And so as we go through this love seat coaching, which means every person gets 2 turns in the love seat, we are not giving content. We don't have an agenda of we're going to cover A, B, C, and D. Every participant is creating the content, because we have our Walters processes. Some people call them visualizations, some people call them meditations, but they're basically our process work to really dig in. We might even create one just for you, because they're personalized to each person. We have a set of them that we utilize, but when we're doing process work with one person and everybody in the group is listening, because all of our brains are networked just like a computer network. Like if you're at your office, you're all on the same network, and our brains are like that too. So you receive benefit from someone else's process work. And what's really cool about it, their details before we get into that process don't have an emotional charge for you. So you actually hear us differently. So we move through the mentoring process with each participant in the love seat, where we're doing cognitive coaching intermixed with process work. And so when we're doing those 2 parts with someone else, you're listening in and riding the coattails of their work too. So the work goes really fast. It's super fun. It may not transform all of your hidden blocks to love. It's kind of like if you want to chop down a giant oak tree, you're going to have to take a few whacks at that trunk before it finally falls over. And that's what we do in the mentoring. We're going to take a few whacks at it. We're going to hope it falls over, but it's going to change the way you've been looking at all of your dating and mating and relating. And I'm putting this little masky thing with my fingers in front of my face to say your perspective changes, because you can't see the thing that's right in front of your face, but we can. And when we adjust that, oh my gosh, things change. So your perspective changes forever when you take a few whacks at the tree trunk, if that makes sense.
Okay, so we have some great questions here. We have R first. Thank you for the great session today. What do you do if another person doesn't want to listen and ask me to leave? Is it abusive if another person always criticizes? So,
I'm going to handle the first part.
You got it.
I'm going to answer the first part. Okay, so thank you for asking your questions, R. I really appreciate that, and all of your audience participation, because that's what makes this love intervention really shine, I think. Okay, if another person doesn't want to listen and ask you to leave, then if they're asking you in the moment, get up and go. And then you have 2 options. See if they reach out to you again, or you can reach out to them after a certain time. And when you're both calm, you can have a conversation. And in the conversation, you have a question to ask. And the question is this: when you need a break or a pause, I'm fine with you needing one, but I need to know how long that pause will be. So will it be for 3 hours, 5 hours, tomorrow, 5 days, a week? And whatever they tell you, you have to come to an agreement that you will reconnect after X amount of time, whatever X amount of time the agreement is. So we usually think we need longer than we do to calm down. And you are responsible for calming your own nervous system, because only you can calm your own nervous system. So if the other person is asking you to leave and doesn't want to listen, that's okay. You can say, oh, I hear that you need a break. I'm going to go. And then I would wait, at least 2 hours, and then maybe text or call and say, are you ready to reconnect now? And if they are, when you come back together, you make the request that if you need a break, please ask for it. Ask for the pause or the break. And then the break is an agreed upon time. So if it's an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours is usually some kind of agreement like that. I hope that's helpful.
If one of you is triggered or upset and the other one wants to keep talking and try to repair it while the upset is still happening, you're just making it worse. It's not helpful. So it is always helpful, especially if one of you is asking for it, that you take a break, that you calm your nervous system.
You take the pause.
Take a pause, right? And allow yourself to calm your nervous system, so then when you come back, you can be from a much calmer place to then work through your differences. Now, if that other person's always criticizing you, is that abusive? It certainly can be, right? Especially if it comes from a place of contempt. So the Gottmans identified what they call the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse when it comes to relationships. And contempt is one of those 4 horsemen. And what that means is if one of these 4 things are there, I can't remember all 4 off the top of my head, but contempt comes out really strongly. If one of these 4 is present, it means the relationship probably will not survive. Because if one of you feels contempt for the other one, then that's not love. It's just not, and it's it's judgment, it's not love, and if it's coming through as criticism, it's, criticism as well, I'll let you talk in a second. Criticism as well is a way of trying to take your own anxieties, fears, concerns, whatever, and project them on the other person, because if I'm saying, look, you're doing it wrong, if you would do it this way, the implication is I would then feel better. Yeah. Right? And so that's also a person who's not taking responsibility for their own emotional state. They're projecting it onto you and making you the cause of their upset.
I thought it was funny. We both wanted to help so bad with this one, like we're both, and I was like, I'm taking this one, you can take the next one, and then I was impatient. I'm so sorry about that.
Apology accepted.
My bad. I can do better. I will do better. But sometimes it makes me laugh when we're both trying to help, and so we're talking over each other, so we both want to help faster. I was going to say this: if the other person is always critical, it sounds, because we always say the biggest block to love is judgment, because what you're saying is this person is judging you, they're criticizing you. And that's a really rickety place. So if they're doing that when they're triggered and only when they're triggered in a disagreement, that's just a bad strategy for when that person is triggered and they're triggered into criticism. If they're just criticizing you all the time, I don't know why you would be in that relationship. I will tell you, when I was dating, I went out with this hot guy, super hot guy, like hot. Oh my gosh. And as soon as we parted, I couldn't stop criticizing myself. My inner dialogue went off the rails. You didn't, and you should have, and you could have, and you didn't, and you should have, and you could have, and you didn't. And I remember I was like, that's not my person. I don't want to be with somebody that triggers me to be critical of myself. So how you feel with that person is the number one most important thing. As a matter of fact, is this week's love note that says what's most important is how you feel?
No.
Was it last week?
Last week, I think, yeah.
Okay, last week's blog post on our Love on Purpose blog, you can go there and read it. It's really talking about your feeling state. So how does that person make you feel? So if it's an always thing, I always get curious with the always, because is it always when they're triggered, or is it just all the time?
Is it just a constant, right?
Yeah.
Because always is an absolute term. And when we're using absolute language like always and never, we're usually triggered, because it's rarely true that always or never are true.
I think R was asking, she says, is it abusive? Meaning, is it abusive if the other person doesn't want to listen and asked me to leave, because that's where it came in the
okay.
thread here. And so I think we kind of covered that. It's not abusive if they just need a break, right? But if they're constantly never want to, they want to
If they're using it as a way of controlling, then
yeah, like they talk, but then they don't want to listen when it's your turn. Then yes, it's abusive. But if they're just triggered, if they're triggered, then no. Or I would say it's toxic in our definitions today. So I would say it's toxic behavior, meaning emotionally abusive.
All right. We have another great question from Vicky.
I'm going to read this one.
Okay.
If I can.
Yes.
My eyesight. Okay. My boyfriend is often triggered most of the time. It seems related to a past relationship. He often apologizes, but then it happens again, which is draining to me. I talk about my feelings and ask him to stop, and it continues. I suggested he do his own counseling, coaching, work. Is there anything else I can do? See, this is somebody taking too much responsibility. Hi, Vicky. Hi. I'm sorry, Vicky, that your boyfriend is getting triggered. There's nothing else for you to do except for to say, hi, I hear that you're feeling triggered. I think you should you might want to get some help for that. Maybe you would feel better.
I have a slightly different answer to that.
I know you do, but I wasn't done talking. You interrupted me.
Go ahead.
So the thing about, is there anything else I can do? See, this is the place where you have to look at the chicken as a chicken, right? Or the egg as the egg. The egg is potential. And I think what we tend to do is we look at people we're in a relationship with as always an egg. But they're not an egg anymore. They're the chicken. They hatched. Okay? So people's strategies can only change so much. I know, it's kind of weird, right? I will tell you, I was talking to a friend earlier today, and she was saying about somebody who had some bad behavior, and I recognized that bad behavior because it was my bad behavior that took me more than a decade to change more consistently over time. Changing behavior can be really hard, and this is a triggering behavior, a triggered response. And a very conscious person that I think I am, and I teach this stuff all day long, took me over a decade to change the initial response. So there's nothing else for you to do in that. There's nothing for you to do, because this person is saying, I'm willing to live with this thing. And if he's willing to live with it and it doesn't work for you, that's the place where I go, I don't know how you fix it. Now I know Matthew has some other things.
Yeah, I disagree with you. Said there's nothing more for you to do. There is actually something more you can do.
Okay.
So when this person apologizes, right? When he apologizes, says, I'm sorry, I was triggered, it's because of my ex, and whatever he says, right? That you have a request of him after he's done with his apology. You say something like, I have a request of you. I would like you to say this statement and mean it. And what I'd like you to say is, I'm going to work on being better. I'm going to commit to being better. That you ask him to verbally make a commitment when he's making the apology, that part of his apology is to say, I will do better next time. And I will work to be a better person so I can do better next time. And then you see, one, is he capable of saying that? Because that speaks a lot. If somebody says something like that out loud, they're making a verbal commitment to something. Two, is he able to then...
Is there a follow-up?
Is there follow-up to that, right? Now, it may not be right away. Behavior, like Orna said, behavior can be difficult to change because oftentimes it's unconscious and we're not aware of it. Yep. And a big part of changing behavior is first just becoming conscious of it and going, oh, there's that behavior again. Oh, there's my thought. There's my desire. Oh, I just did that behavior again, right? So that you're conscious of it, and then consciousness allows you to take the next step, which is to interrupt it and do something different.
I would like to say you're awesome. I love what you gave her that about what else you can do, and I'm going to plus it. So I think everything Matthew said, and I'm going to add something else in, which is when he's done apologizing, before you accept his apology, and it's your turn to talk, you can say something like what Matthew said. And then the plus side is, I would love to hear your apology again, and would you add, if I had it to do over again?
That's another great phrase.
If I had it to do over again. So my initial response, I still hold as valid, because you have to see the willingness of the other person, and you can also ask. But if you ask and they give you the verbal agreement, yes, I can do that, and they say that, but there's no effort. See, somebody's effort counts. Like, we tell this story over and over again. I like it when a guy opens the car door for me. And when we started dating, Matthew didn't open my car door. I made a request, nowhere near the car. If he'd open the car door, he said yes. But then it wasn't a habit. So at the beginning of our dating, I'd asked him a few weeks into dating, and he didn't remember. So I didn't admonish him in any way. I just stood there by the car door, like,
my door should be opening, but it's not. I don't know what's wrong with the door.
I'm just going to wait here patiently. And I'd smile. And then he'd be like, oh, right. And he'd run over to my side of the car and he'd open the car door. So the effort counts. See, if he makes effort, even if he forgets, right? Like, triggered, oh, there's that thing again. Oh, I'm going to do better. Right? So if he owns, like, I'm doing better. Oh, I tripped, but I'll do better. I'm going to learn to walk. Like, look, a kid learning to walk, they never give up. Never. They fall down tons of times, over and over and over again. So when you ask somebody to change something that's inherent in their behavior, you have to have that patience. And you can have it if you have the agreement he's going to work on it.
I'm going to plus your plus and say there's one more thing you can ask for. If this is consistent, right? If this has been happening for a while and he's apologized but there's been no effort to change his behavior, you can ask for an amends. You can say, I hear your apology, but I don't fully trust you in that apology yet. And what I need you to do is I need you to do something for me that says you're really serious about your apology, and I need you to make an amends. Now, the thing about amends is amends doesn't have to be in direct relation to the behavior, right?
It could be anything.
I know there was an amends I made where I think it was for a month, maybe it was even 3 months. Once a week, I brought home fresh flowers so that we had fresh flowers in the house.
Like a month,
right?
yeah.
Yeah. And so that was an action that I was consistent in taking to say, hey, look, I know that I crossed the line in my behavior and I'm not proud of it. And I didn't want to make it up to you. Mm-hmm. And it is a way of repairing lost trust in a relationship.
Yeah.
So you can also ask for an amends. I hope that helps.
Yep. A couple more things. I know we're running over a little bit, but I wanna address that. R says thank you. I appreciate. Mwah, you're so welcome, and Vicky too. Thank you for being so open and vulnerable and sharing what's going on with you too. And Susan has this other statement. She says, and I think this is a misconception, Susan, because it's not what you say, it's how you say it. So Susan says this. When I take things slow, the men get impatient. And I think that is a misconception. The man who's the guy for you doesn't just want sex or doesn't want to just date whoever or just want companionship. Those are the guys that get impatient. The guy who's like, you're my person, you're my woman, would move mountains for you, even in the beginning of the relationship. Mm-hmm. So it's all in how you say it. So if you're getting all sexy time with somebody and it's all kissy and the dry touchy over the clothes, whatever, right? And you're like, no, I want to take things slow. Okay. If you just say no, right? Any of those things are kind of a turnoff.
It's a rejection.
It's a rejection. So you want to be careful of that. We hear it all the time, ladies, is a fragile male ego. It's true. But there's a big difference if you do that versus, I'm just going to literally like role play here. Oh, babe, it's going to be so hot when we do it, but I'm not ready to yet.
All right. Okay. Let me know when you are.
What do you think of that? It's going to be so hot when we do it. I'm not ready to go there yet. I'm not ready for that yet.
I need to get to know you better. I need to feel more comfortable. I need to, whatever it is, right? You can be a little more specific about it, but it really is about delaying. It's not about saying no.
It's just about saying, it's what you're saying is not yet. I'm not ready to do that deed yet. I would like to do that.
I'm not ready to go exclusive yet.
Yes.
I am looking to go exclusive. I would love to get to know you better. I'm not ready to do that. But we're still strangers, so yeah. I'm not comfortable doing that yet.
I mean, we've had clients come back where the guy tells them a couple dates after they've said not yet, and they go, oh, you know what? I'm actually glad. You're right. We still don't know each other. I've had all these little short-term relationships I keep rushing into exclusivity, and you're right. We should take things slower. But the guy who's ready for you wants to take you off the market. So it's a good call when somebody asks to go exclusive, but you may not be ready yet. That yet is so important. So remember, you can say anything to anyone. It's all in how you say it. And if you want more of, oh my gosh, we shared so much tonight. I'm glad that we did. We're not holding back in any way because this is a love intervention. We're here to intervene in your love life, get you start looking at dating and mating and relating in a whole new way. And if you want more from us, we've got our Love on Purpose mentoring. We start September 9th. So we'll start after Labor Day. You can have your summer fun. And then it's like back to love school with us. And we're going to take a few whacks at your hidden blocks to love while you're in the love seat. We're going to love you up. And it's a small group. So go to loveonpurposementoring.com. And we're going to be back with Love Intervention in 2 weeks. So that's July the 25th. I'm glad I have a note to tell me the date that I obviously just looked at. And same time, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern. Thank you for joining us for tonight's Love Intervention.
And thanks to our team for assisting us in moving over those questions from Facebook.
Thank you
and
so much.
YouTube, thank you so much.
Have a great night. Bye for now.
3